Hi everyone, welcome to Criminal Justice 201 Policing. This is week 11, special topic, police use of force. I'm Professor Jason Ostro. It's an important and timely topic, so let's get started. So this week we will describe different terms associated with police use of force. Then we'll explain the police use of force continuum, discuss what is well known about police use of force, discuss what is mostly known about police use of force, discuss what is not so well known about police use of force, and then finally I'm going to introduce you to the Washington Post Police Use of Force database. Police use of force, some terms. I talked about this a little bit earlier in the semester, but I'm going to go into a little bit more depth here. When we think about police use of force, that could refer to any physical contact to gain compliance. Not just physical contact, but also the threat of physical contact in order to gain compliance for some lawful means. That could involve a grab, shove, a strike, using pepper spray, a baton, a conducted energy device, which is like a stun gun, or even a firearm. Other terms that are important to know about when it comes to police use of force are threaten deadly physical force. If a police officer threatens deadly physical force, or you hear this term, threaten deadly physical force, that means a police officer displayed a firearm in order to gain some kind of compliance, right? They displayed a firearm. They didn't shoot the firearm, they just displayed it. Deadly physical force is force that can cause death, right? So that's typically sometimes it includes other types of force than just using your firearm. Like it could use certain types of baton strikes, but that's neither here nor there. We'll go with the more conventional definition, which is deadly physical force, which is force that can and does cause death, which is typically reserved for police use of a firearm, right? Police use of a firearm. Then there's less lethal force, and I don't want you to be confused because in popular news media, in online, in news reports, even among people in the police profession, they often say non-lethal force. They'll say something was non-lethal. They'll describe a baton strike as non-lethal. They'll describe a conducted energy device, a stun gun, as non-lethal. These aren't non-lethal. That's a misnomer. It's a very poor term to use. It's a very inaccurate term to use when it comes to using that type of force. A better term is less lethal force. And the reason that that's a better term is because it's force that's intended to be less than deadly, but still can cause death. For example, pepper spray. Now, you wouldn't think that pepper spray can kill somebody, but in fact, people have died as a result of being pepper sprayed by the police. Asthma attacks. You don't think that a conducted energy device could kill somebody, but in fact it could under a variety of circumstances. So it does in fact happen, which is incredibly tragic. And when it does, to say it's non-lethal is very misleading. It's less lethal, right? Less lethal force. So force that's intended to be less than deadly, but still can cause death. And then you get into these other terms that are associated with police brutality, typically, and illegal use of force. And the first two most common are excessive force and unnecessary force. So excessive force is this idea that police are using lawful force, but they're using too much of it. And because they're using too much of it, it therefore becomes unlawful. Right? So like, for example, a police officer goes to arrest somebody and that person is resisting. Now, what a police officer should do, depending on the facts and circumstances, is maybe use empty hand technique, grab the person's arm, put it behind their back, something along those lines. But to grab somebody who's resisting, maybe, again, facts and circumstances matter, just for the purposes of this definition. Imagine somebody who's lightly resisting. They're just flailing their arms a little bit. And then the police officer maybe picks the person up, drops them on their head, and then handcuffs them. That seems like excessive, right? It was initially lawful, but the excessive nature of it was just made it unlawful. Unnecessary is just force that's not needed. That is not needed. All right, so that it shouldn't be used. It shouldn't be used. So an example would be if you think about a police officer goes to arrest somebody, that person is not resisting, and then that officer takes the person, throws him to the ground, and handcuffs him. That's just simply not necessary, right? I mean, facts and circumstances matter, of course, but let's just say there's no weapons involved, there's no, imminent danger to the officer or anything like that. The officer just, grabs them, throws them to the ground, and handcuffs them. That would be unnecessary, right? So excessive and unnecessary are close, but they're not exactly the same, right? So now that we get to this term, police brutality, which is really a term of art more than it is an exact definition. And the reason I say that is because this definition that I'm giving you here comes from a chapter of a book, which is on critical issues in policing. They refer to police brutality as instances of serious physical or psychological harm, with the emphasis on cruelty or savagery, that's done by police officers. And I'm okay with that definition. But police brutality is more of a term of art, and it's sort of like the type of thing that you know and you see it, right? Something that's unnecessary, excessive, with an intent to punish, to be cruel. That's not the police role. It's not the job of the police to punish. Right, and then you have illegal use of force, right? So that can be unjustified and or unnecessary force. So illegal force is any unjustified or unnecessary use of police force. So that's unlawful, right? Something that's police officers that are doing that they should not be doing. Okay. Brings us to what's known as the police use of force continuum, which is something I introduced you to, again, a few weeks back, but again, it's important to make sure that you're aware of this. Continuum is, you can think of that as a scale, right? A sliding scale, right? And that scale typically starts on one end and then it works all the way up to another end. And police departments throughout the United States use a variety of different continuums, but they all sort of follow the same pattern. This, what you see in front of you, is by the Department of Justice, National Institute of Justice, police use of force continuum, and so it's the most widely accepted in the United States because remember, there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, and their use of force continuums can vary place to place, but they all sort of follow this similar framework. So the first level is what's known as officer presence. There is a dispute going on, an argument in the street. The police show up, and just by their mere presence, right? By their mere presence, they are able to, people scatter, right? They break it. The dispute breaks up. Level 2 is verbalization. So verbalization is police officers giving commands. Stop, don't move, turn around, right? Break it up. You go this way, you go that way, right? So that's verbalization. Empty hand control would be like a grab or a hold, and it could include a strike too, so like a punch or a kick if necessary. So empty hand control, grabs or holds. So the police show up to the dispute. Their mere presence, lights and sirens don't do anything. They get over there, they give some orders. That doesn't do anything. So then maybe they start grabbing people and pulling them apart. Level 4 would be less lethal devices such as a baton, a pepper spray, or a conductive energy device. They show up. The police, that is, show up at this dispute. The RMPs don't scare the people away. The police vehicles don't scare the people away. The officers' presence don't scare the disputers away. Police give directions. The people who are fighting, they don't listen. The police try and break it up. It turns into a big melee. So then the police take out pepper spray, right? Or maybe a baton. Right? So or maybe a conductive energy device. That's moving up the continuum. And then last but not least would be deadly physical force, right? Which would be the display of a firearm or using the firearm. But remember, threatened deadly physical force is showing, and then using is firing a weapon. So now some people look at this and say, these have to go in order, and the answer is no. It's a continuum, but it doesn't mean it's not an order to it necessarily. And what do I mean by that is, so the police show up at a dispute and nobody has any weapons and people are just arguing. Well, you could see how this would work in a very logical, orderly way. Level 1, level 2, level 3. But the world doesn't necessarily work like that. And the world of policing doesn't necessarily work like that. So, for example, the police show up and instead of there being just a dispute, an argument, somebody pulls a gun or a knife on somebody else. Right? Is it the police show up and there's a gun pointing at another person? Can the police, do they just, say, put the gun down? Maybe, but maybe they have to display a firearm to do that. Or what if the person has a knife? Or what if they have a baseball bat, right? Or some kind of other weapon, right? So you can go to other levels. It doesn't have to go directly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can go directly to 5 if necessary. It can, go right to 3. So it depends on the facts and circumstances. So what is known about police use of force by scholars in policing? First is that, contrary to what many people think and they see in the news and media, is that police actually use force very infrequently. Believe it or not, the studies show that less than 1% of all police-citizen encounters, police use force, which is, you might look at that and say, that can't be. And it's actually quite true if you think about it, because police have, in the United States, have and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, it's hundreds of millions of contacts with citizens a year. hundreds of millions. I mean, if you don't believe me, just think about this for a second. In New York City alone, the NYPD gets called. There are about 12 million 911 calls a year in New York City alone. That's just 911 calls. That's not 311 calls. That's not like, officer, can you help me, flagging me down on the street, or just interactions. And when you consider all those interactions, yeah, it's hundreds of millions of interactions between police and citizens every year. And in less than 1% of those, the police actually use force. So it actually is relatively rare. Relatively rare. All right, most force that police use is on the lower end of this continuum, which is very true as well, because when police place people under arrest, they typically have to put their hands on that individual. So weaponless tactics are used in approximately 80% of use of force incidents. That might just be like turn around, and you have to take somebody's arm, they don't comply. They're not fighting you, they don't have a weapon, but maybe for whatever reason the police have to use some kind of empty hand control. And that leads to the next point, which is most use of force occurs when police attempt to make place somebody under arrest. So suspects use force against the police 14% in 14% of arrests, which is quite a bit. And police use force against suspects in about 22% of arrests. And there are a number of reasons why, right? These are not in the world of policing, these are fights that the police can't lose, right? Remember, they represent the authority of the government, and so compliance is required. And if the individual doesn't comply, then the police are justified in using force. Okay, it has to be appropriate and necessary force, but not still justified. All right, what is mostly known? Mostly known. Mostly means more than 50%, right? So use of force is really unrelated to an officer's personal characteristics, age, gender, ethnicity. What it is actually closely related to is a police officer's tenure, like how long somebody's been an officer. That is very closely related to that. Many people make arguments that we would have less police brutality if the members of the community, the police, were of the same race or ethnicity. And I don't disagree with the idea that police should be representative of the community in which they're serving. I think that's overall a very good thing. But the argument that the use of force and police brutality and excessive force would be less or fewer as a result of that is actually, just factually incorrect. It's not supported by the data or the research. Officers are more likely to use force against members of their own race, which is actually quite surprising to a lot of people. All right, and force is more likely to be used when the police are interacting with individuals who are drugged, intoxicated, emotionally disturbed, maybe a combination of those three things. And what's also interesting is that most police officers don't use any force at all. It's a very small percentage that are involved in routine or regular, regularly engaged in use of force. Okay. Okay, so that's what's mostly known, and then we'll move on to what is unknown, meaning these are still questions that are just out there, and scholars and researchers are not really quite sure of it yet. How frequently police wrongfully use force is very difficult to determine. There are ways to kind of look at that, like by complaints, by how often police get sued. Sure, but that doesn't account for all the times that police use force unlawfully or wrongfully, and it doesn't get reported. So that's the big issue there. How use of force is influenced by organization practices, such as hiring, training, internal discipline, use of technology. That's something that's beginning to change with early intervention systems for the better, but still it's an open question. All right, that leads us to the Washington Post Police Shootings Database, okay, which is a big part of your assignment this week as far as the discussion board. So the Washington Post is a newspaper. This is the online version of it, and they've been tracking police shootings, police use of deadly physical force shootings in the United States since around 2014 or 15. I don't remember what year exactly. And they've been, tracking that according to a variety of variables of things that change related to what you're studying. So, the individual's age, an individual's race, an individual's gender, the situational characteristics of those police shootings. And so they create this database, and you could look up, like, how frequently police shoot and kill people in the United States. What are the demographics of those individuals? What were the circumstances? So it's really, it's a very useful database to look at. And I think you're going to be quite surprised, or many of you probably will be very surprised by what you find when you start to dig into that. So review the material, consider the following, right? Are you surprised by how frequently or infrequently police shoot and kill people in the United States? Right, so that might be surprising because it seems like it happens a lot, which it does. But it happens a lot. It happens quite frequently, but relative to 750,000 police officers and 320 million people in the United States, um, 1,000 police shootings a year actually is really, really, really quite low. But anyway, that's for you to discern when you look at the database. And then also look at the personal characteristics, right, of the individuals. All right, so your assignments for this particular week, you have a YouTube video on there, which is interesting. It's about it's a discussion about police training and use of force. There's a chapter from a book there about understanding police use of force, which will help dispel some ideas and myths about, give you some clarity on that. And then you have to review the Washington Post police shooting database, complete your discussion board assignment before Thursday and Sunday, and then pay special attention because I'm asking that you have 2 responses to your discussion board assignment. And that last point down there is a little bit of a typo. So you have to complete reflection assignment number 3 before 11:59 p.m. That's true. The 2 responses relate to the discussion board, though. All right, so please, hopefully you don't have any confusion. There's a lot to do this week. This is an important chapter. I'm sorry, important lesson, important material, and I hope it's enlightening and interesting for you. Okay, I hope you found this useful, and I will see you all online.